Kim Minos has been working with plants and herbs all his life. Initially through horticulture, landscape design, permaculture, and environmental education. He then moved to naturopathy and lecturing in naturopathic education as part of his process of healing. He had chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and multiple chemical sensitivities. He's lectured in herbal medicine and naturopathic philosophy. Excuse me, I'm going in my Spanish mind, having lived there for a long time. Naturopathic philosophy for many years, and is a mentor for recent graduates of naturopathy. He has worked with hospitals and the medical profession to help create bridges between complementary medicine and Western medicine. He now works from his home-based clinic, growing herbs and manufacturing medicines. He conducts herbal medicine workshops, teaching herbal medicine manufacturing and exploring our relationships with the kingdoms of nature, all from his garden. His approach to healing is continuously evolving and incorporates the naturopathic principles of the healing power in nature, with classes in meditation and personal spiritual alchemy. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you this afternoon, Kim, and we look forward very much to hearing from you all your wisdom. Welcome to our conference. We need to unmute, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Caroline. It's lovely to be here. And a lovely introduction. What I'm sharing about is just probably about my most favorite thing in the world. It's just our relationship with the land and our relationship with the natural kingdoms. I find that kind of essential to all of my senses of well-being. And I guess my work as a naturopath and in other areas in environmental science have kind of highlighted why that relationship is the way it is. It's an interesting thing. I love the topic of this conference, embodied meditation, and looking at how do we kind of like embody meditation as a way of being rather than something that we do when we kind of like sit quietly for an hour on our own. It's how do we bring that into a state of being. And I find that working with the planet and with the natural kingdoms provides so many opportunities to be able to kind of experience and live that. It's a really interesting thing. We kind of like this body that we inhabit is given to us by the planet. You know, like every bit of this kind of vehicle we inhabit, all of the bits of it come from the planet. So we literally are, our physical structure is literally part of the planet. So we're not separate from it. It's kind of like there's an entrance or a gateway into unity and oneness there. When we get really, really connected to this vehicle that we're inhabiting and we feel where it comes from, it helps us to really ground and connect into the planet because we are physically part of the planet. And then the links kind of continue. It's like we're literally part of the environmental biosphere of the planet. We're not separate from it. So everything that we do affects the planet and everything on the planet affects us. So it's almost like we're part of the microbiome of the planet. Just like we have an internal and an external microbiome in us, all kinds of different bacteria that fulfill all sorts of essential functions that keep us alive and we keep them alive. The same thing is going on with the planet. Humanity fulfills a particular function with the planet. Sometimes those functions become unbalanced, which they are when we look around at sort of how things are going in some ways. But humanity does provide an essential function on the planet. And so I find this kind of understanding like a doorway into realizing that and to experiencing that I'm not separate from any of the natural kingdoms. It's like if I'm kind of wondering how I'm going, I go and lay down on the ground and put my heart on the planet. It's like the planet's like our mother, and cultures throughout time have known this. They've seen the planet, Gaia, as our mother. She provides the sustenance and the life force and all of the things that we need and a place to live on which to have experience and evolve and grow. So she provides all of that for us. And American Indians, Australian Aboriginals, Indigenous cultures everywhere have known this. When I'm wondering how things are going for me and I kind of go inward, one of the things I like to do is just go and lie on the ground, and I sort of like put my heart on the planet and just feel into any resistances that might be within me. She reflects immediate resistances to any kind of sense of separation. And so it kind of highlights anything that I'm running egoic where I might feel like I'm separate from something. So the planet gives us immediate feedback as to whether or not we're kind of in a state of oneness and unity, or whether we're kind of identifying with our egoic senses of separation and that kind of thing. So she gives us immediate feedback. We all know how profoundly healing being in nature can be. And there are those places in nature that kind of are very, very special and untouched. And it's like we get a doorway into those senses of sacredness and reverence that are held on the planet. And it's because, you know, certain conglomerations of natural energies and different parts of the kingdoms on the planet come together to create sacredness. They come together to create reverence. And it's like there's precious little left of that in our life these days. And so it's lovely to have those kind of like resonators of those qualities out in nature to go and relate with. We all know that when we go and spend time walking in nature, even just kind of like walking through a park, it doesn't have to be kind of wild virgin forest or that sort of thing. We just start to feel better. Even putting plants in a room like these behind me. Nature has the ability to kind of resonate, or it just resonates in such a way to remind us of where our natural reset is as a human being. There's a thing called the Schumann frequency, which is the natural resonant frequency of the planet. And it's about 7.5 hertz. It fluctuates from place to place on the planet, but about 7.5 hertz. And the human body resonates at the same frequency as the planet does. So that when we go and spend time with nature, nature provides something like a tuning fork to provide a resonant frequency that reminds us of where our natural reset is for us to be in a healthy place. When we get busy in life, we get exposed to kind of Wi-Fi, stressful environments, that sort of thing. Our resonant frequency changes. When we drink coffee, it profoundly changes our resonant frequency. All kinds of things that we expose ourselves to change our natural internal resonant state. And then that starts to create disharmonious resonance through the body. Go spend some time in nature, and it's like if we're open and receptive, we just feel like that tuning fork effect of nature as it resonates through us. And so we naturally kind of move back to a state of homeostatic balance, because we're constantly in that process of restoring ourselves to a place of harmony. If one of the fundamental principles of natural medicine is that all life works on returning itself to its own inherent state of harmony or homeostasis, and that we as human beings and all structures of life know how to do that of their own accord. It's our natural tendency to want to return to a state of health. The main thing we need to address is what gets in the way of doing that, the sorts of things that we're exposed to, or the things that we're doing internally that get in the way of returning to that natural state of resonant frequency that is homeostasis for us. And so when we're healthy, we're in a state of homeostatic balance with the planet. So it's like the planet's never very, very far away. It's like it's almost always beneath our feet. And so she's a way of accessing that sense of really being grounded and then connected to where our center is, where our natural reset point is. When you really feel into the planet, it's like she holds qualities of unconditional love and tolerance for all of humanity, regardless of what humanity's doing. It's like she's very, very tolerant. And so you can kind of like reconnecting with the planet when you feel disconnected for it. And you can get that sense of acceptance and tolerance and unconditional love as a very, very real felt experience. And that can be profoundly healing in its own way. One of the things that I find profoundly almost magical kind of in nature is the relationship between the kingdoms. There's the mineral kingdom, the Davic kingdom. That's kind of like the energies of nature that aren't necessarily so physically seen, but can be felt as profound influences. And there's some of what we feel when we walk into old forests and expose ourselves to what's really there. And it's like you get a sense of something, and it's more than just what's physically around. Part of it is these energies, these Davic energies. And they've been given all kinds of names over time, the parts of it, guardians, fairies, divas, all sorts of things. They're very much there, and they're part of the kingdoms, one of the kingdoms on this planet. We have the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom, and the kingdom of souls. And working with nature or going into nature is a way of developing a deeper relationship with this kind of like wonderful intricacy of the web of life, where we feel through the kind of the veils between the kingdoms. It's like this, for me, the experiences of something like quite magical, when you can kind of like feel beyond the experience of just what it is to be a human creature or a human entity, and feel into the kingdom of plants, the plant kingdom, and what their experiences are and how they work as collective consciousnesses. They have got individual natures, but they work much more as collectives. The animal kingdom is a very, very similar thing. They have their own individual senses of consciousness, but not self-conscious as humans, but they also have the collective of the different kind of species of animals in the animal kingdom. And I find that when we kind of traverse those boundaries, and it's more like a feeling into as a resonant frequency and allowing ourselves to be merged with them, there's this kind of like wonderful doorway that opens into these worlds that exist all around us all the time, but that we are often kind of blithely unaware of. And the closest kind of description I can give to it is it's almost like a sense of magic and a sense of wonder that's kind of in those kind of traversing of the veils between the different kingdoms. I had a little experience of that just recently, last year actually. I inherited a couple of rabbits, and they were rescue rabbits, and so they just lived in my house until they died last year, and they were just kind of like part of the family, and they would come and go. And I was very, very fond of these rabbits and learned a lot from them, and they healed a whole bunch of kind of traumas from being kind of rescue animals in the process. And one of the rabbits, her name was Violet. She developed a tumor on her shoulder, and it started to push her leg off. And so the kindest thing to do was to put her to sleep. And so I just arranged for the vet to come around and give her an injection to put her to sleep just before I was going away. And so I'm sitting outside having a cup of tea with her, and she's kind of like bouncing around the garden and kind of coming up and sitting with me. And I'm sort of just patting her quietly. And it was like just a few minutes before the vet arrived for her to go. And I live in the country surrounded by forest and bush and plants, and I grow lots of medicines, big garden and all that sort of thing. And I kind of feel like I have a reasonable sense of relationship to nature, kind of like just sitting there quietly. I could hear lots of different birds. I could kind of like hear insects and all the different sounds of the leaves rustling, the wind, all kinds of kind of sensorial experiences of nature. As I was patting the rabbit, it's like the parting gift from this rabbit just before it died was, it's like it lost all of its fear of being a prey animal. And in that, this kind of veil parted, and she gave me an insight into her experience of being a rabbit in nature. And between every one experience that I could sense, it opened up about 1,000-fold in terms of experience and qualities of experience that the rabbit was experiencing. And so it was just like this profound symphony of life that was about 1,000 times richer than I was able to perceive in that moment kind of open up as a result of my relationship with the rabbit and what she was experiencing and her levels of sensitivities. And it just gave me this kind of profound insight into how much more there is in terms of perception of experience as we open ourselves to our relationships with plants and animals and even minerals as well through the different kingdoms and Davic energies through all of the kingdoms. And it kind of builds a deeper sense of that sense of interconnectedness, kind of feeling much more a part of the web of life. There's this kind of like wonderful richness in this thing called the web of life that kind of stretches across the whole of the planet. And it starts to break down the limitations of what our perceived sense of scope is and sphere of influence is. It's like once you start feeling into kind of like connections through the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom, and through the land, it's like the awareness starts to travel through the land so that you can kind of move all around the globe, right around the planet. And so our awareness is not limited by what we can see in front of us. We can actually feel and experience all of the planet and all of what's going on the planet if we want to. It's kind of like there and available all the time. For me, it just kind of feels natural. As I was a kid growing up, I didn't sort of understand that this wasn't what other people experienced, but it's kind of like I don't know, it's just something that I feel is we're a part of life, and the more a part of life we kind of like let ourselves be and be influenced by life, the more we are able to access this so that we feed back into life and life feeds back into us. And I find that profoundly spiritual and profoundly meditative. It's like, for me, it's like a living meditation, because the experience of kind of like, it's very, very quiet, and it can be very, very still and silent in terms of no activity in my mind, but at the same time, an awareness of profound richness. Like there's nothing that's static, and you know, God's not static. It's like that life is constantly evolving and shifting and in movement, and yet there can be profound stillness at the same time. And I get exactly the same experience just by accessing nature and being one with nature. And some people say, you know, oh, I don't have time for that sort of thing in my life. I get that a lot in my work as a naturopath, people that live busy lives and they work in the city and they've got to drive home, come home to their wife and kids. And I kind of suggest sometimes as a therapeutic intervention to just, okay, if you don't have time to kind of like go wander with the kids in the park or do something that's in nature, on your way home from work, from a busy, stressful day in the office, just stop the car and go for a walk in that park just for 10 minutes, and then get back into your car and drive home and just notice what happens and see if you can do it 2 or 3 times a week. And it's not like that in itself fixes them or heals them, but it opens the door for them to be aware of more possibilities, to be open to more possibilities of what can occur and what they can do that they couldn't perceive of when they were fixed in their busy life of franticness, work, home, and no time for anything else. So it's like this, even just these few minutes close to trees and nature open the door for something else to kind of occur and to start to see that, oh, I could see my life differently. I could see different possibilities that I could than I could imagine before. So nature kind of gives us access to sort of quiet stillness, which then opens doors for other possibilities that we may perhaps not recognize within ourselves at the time. And so it starts to generate healing capacities in that way as well, just by people becoming aware of more of the scope of what their life can be about, or maybe who that they are, and how what feels more authentic for them, so that they can kind of like acknowledge and accept what they're feeling in ways that they couldn't when they were kind of frantic and busy. There's been enormous amounts of research on this. That when I first was interested in this, there wasn't a lot of studies around, but these days there are literally thousands or tens of thousands of studies that show us that any amount of exposure to nature, even pot plants in a room, will have a therapeutic effect. And therapeutic effects beyond the fact that it's nice to look at something green and that the plants manufacture more oxygen in the room and release negative ions, that there's something else going on. And it's not so easy to quantify what that something is. Attempts are made to do it. And they kind of like those attempts, if we try and kind of become too rational about it, I think we end up losing the possibility or the open doorway to the experience of how much more there is, because how much more there is they haven't worked out a way to quantify yet, and it's not necessarily a quantifiable thing. Some of those studies show remarkable effects from very, very small amounts of exposure. I was reading a study recently about Detroit. And Detroit used to be the center of the car manufacturing industry of the world. And then some decades ago, that all crashed and they closed the car industry. And Detroit turned from kind of like a bustling, prosperous city to huge areas becoming sort of wastelands and ghettos of poverty. And the crime rate just started to increase exponentially in those areas. It was very hard to get kind of like clean, fresh, healthy food. Lots of kind of empty, derelict buildings and shops, lots of rubbish in the streets, that sort of thing. And so they conducted this experiment. They went in and on a couple of corner blocks, corner allotments that just had junk and rubbish on them, they cleaned them off and they planted a bunch of trees, put down some grass, grew some plants. So it was just a simple allotment that they turned green and put a couple of seats in. And they noticed that within several months, the crime rate in those areas dropped dramatically. Violent crimes dropped enormously. Robberies dropped enormously. The one crime rate that didn't drop was car theft, interestingly. But all other levels of crime dropped. And so they started replicating this around the city, and they noticed that it had an effect, and the effect was stronger closer to the green areas, and the further out you went from the green area, the less effective the reduction in crime rate was. They've used similar studies on human health, and they've looked at where there are areas of green in a town or a city, and then looked at the health of the population, both of adults and of children. And they found that the closer you are to areas of green, the better your mental health is, better psychological health is, and better all aspects of physical health are. And they've measured them: cardiovascular health, hormone health, psychological health. And even for children, learning capacity at school improves as they are exposed to more green areas. And they plotted the distances. So like within 100, 200 meters, there was a noticeable effect. There was a difference in effect at 500 meters. There was a difference in effect at 1 kilometer, and there was a difference in effect at 2 kilometers. But there was still an effect even at 2 kilometers. And whether or not it was just that sense of there's some green there, or that the person visited, and maybe the closer you are to green space, the more often you visit it. That wasn't kind of really analysed in the research, but what was very, very clear was that children's learning capacity at school increased enormously the more they were exposed to green areas, or the closer that they lived to green areas. Pretty much every area of psychological health for the child improved as well. Cardiovascular health is probably the thing that's most studied, and the results on that are unequivocal. They're just significant improvements, but other health benefits that arrived as well from being exposed to green. I could probably quote this that part for ages, but I don't feel like there's kind of like a lot of need for that, because probably from your own experience, it's very self-evident that you go and spend time in nature and you just feel better. It doesn't have to be very long. It can just be 5 or 10 minutes, but you go and spend a few hours or a day, you go for a drive and go for a walk for a couple of hours up in the hills or out in the forest somewhere, and you feel significantly different. You can measure drops in cortisol responses in the body. The body's own regenerative and healing capacity significantly increase the more we expose ourselves to this. The other thing that occurs is that the mind just generally starts to go quieter. the more we spend time in nature. And I sense that, it can be that sense of being in the presence of things that are majestic and beautiful, that are filled with wonder and awe, but also that sense that when we go into nature, it sort of becomes reflective of how we are in ourselves. And the more centered and grounded and present we become with ourselves, the more grounded we become, the more aware we become of what's going on inside of us, how we are inside of ourselves. And that then opens us up to more of, how do I really feel? What am I feeling? What is my experience of feeling on the inside? And just that being more open to experiencing feelings starts to slow down the mind in itself. Because a lot of the mind activity, from my experience, is that 95% of that kind of mental chatter of the mind that sort of just does its own thing comes from learned experiences of avoiding and denying feeling. That much of when we have feelings going on the inside that we kind of like are not comfortable with, or we've learned to avoid over time, one of the ways to avoid that for a human is to just get busy in the mind. And that when our mind slows down, we become present, or we slow our mind down and we become present, we become more aware of what it is that we're feeling. And as we allow ourselves to feel our feelings and not judge them, they tend to dissipate. Our kind of resistance tends to kind of melt away. It's almost like we become more self-loving and self-accepting, to be okay with how we are inside ourselves, regardless of what's going on. And so that level of reduction of judgment of ourselves and our experience starts to occur. And the more that happens, the more I find that the mind just goes quiet. My experience is that if I'm not resisting what I'm feeling, my mind's just quiet. I don't have to think thoughts. And so this kind of like the monkey chatter stuff, if it starts up again, to me, it's a red flag that, oh, there's some feelings that I'm avoiding. So I go and pay attention to it and just check in what's going on in my heart. What's my experience? What do I need to feel? Just as energy that's passing through that just needs to be acknowledged and felt so it can be released. And every time I do that, my mind goes quiet again. And this stillness comes back. And so it's sort of become a very, very clear thing that the busyness of the mind is directly related to a certain amount of avoidance of feeling, and that we can do an enormous amount to quieten that busyness just by allowing ourselves to acknowledge, accept, and feel what it is that we're feeling. And to me, that's part of embodying meditative states, to be able to get around, to be getting around and just not thinking anything for minutes or hours at a time, is a lovely experience. It kind of, if there is a sense of busyness, there's a sense of, well, there's an awareness now for myself anyway, that, okay, there's something I need to address. There's something I need to just acknowledge and accept within myself, so that I can allow myself to be kind of in allowance and acceptance, or at peace with that. And then it all goes quiet again. And being in nature provides that kind of reflective experience of what's going on inside of us. And it also provides a profound sense of safety as well. Or for me, it's safety. Maybe for some people it's not. But that sense of, you go into nature and it's okay just to be how you are. Nature's not going to judge you for how you are. It's not going to attack you. Well, most bits of nature aren't going to attack you. And in Australia, we're pretty safe most of the time. It does provide that kind of level of, nature doesn't judge. Nature's kind of, it's almost like there's an acceptance of how humans are, isn't it? It's not kind of like a judgmental thing. And so it creates a space where we can allow more of ourselves to come into the experience, or into that space of acceptance of how we are. So I find that very, very useful, as a therapeutic intervention for myself, but also for other patients, for patients that I work with. I've done a lot of work with schools, with children, helping set up environment programs and recycling programs, and then they turned into bushland regeneration programs. And it all started from doing some landscape design work for this school, but it was in Sherbrooke Forest in Victoria, in the Dandenong Ranges, and noticed that the children didn't have a relationship to the plants that were being planted in their environment around them, and they would walk over things that had just been planted and that sort of thing. And the principal of the school, who was a nun, kind of asked, why is that the way it is? And I pondered, and it was like, they don't have a relationship with their environment, despite the fact that they live in this amazingly beautiful forest. So we set about setting up programs to help children become aware of their environment and the places that they lived and the natural kingdom around them, and how they can influence that. And there were lots and lots of different programs that we used for that. And sometimes they were just little things, but they had very, very big effects. Recycling awareness of what they were using, horticulture programs, growing food, growing medicines, started herb gardens for them, and then running some workshops for the kids in herbal medicine, so that they would kind of like have a relationship with plants and how to use them. And it profoundly changed the schools, the students in the school, and the school's relationship with their environments. The students started to get involved in bushland regeneration programs and taking care of the wider environment around them. And their sense of well-being that came from that was significantly improved. They had a sense of belonging and a greater sense of purpose in their community and their environment. It was that increased sense of belonging that they realized that they were part of the land, that they were part of the environment, and that they had an effect on it. And that effect could be positive, neutral, or negative. And just the awareness of that caused lots of these girls, it was a girls' school, to rethink their relationship to the land and what they were doing. And a lot of them decided that they wanted to have a positive relationship. And then that decision, and then the actions that they took about the improvements that they could make, had a beneficial effect on their own sense of well-being and self-esteem. They felt like they were contributing to something important in the world. And so they didn't feel kind of powerless. And all of that coming from just pondering, how do we kind of develop and improve our relationship to our environment? Because it's that sense of connectedness that helps then open the doors to all the other benefits and wonderful things that can occur as we deepen our relationship with nature. I find gardening is a remarkable therapeutic tool. Just going out and planting things or digging in the garden, doing some weeding for just 10 minutes or 15 minutes can have a profound effect on slowing down the mind, on kind of changing body chemistry, on changing hormones. All kinds of interesting studies in that sort of area. But if you go into the garden and you just start kind of weeding and becoming aware of the plants that are around you and what does the garden require, you start listening to the environment, and it gives you feedback about how you can relate with it in a way that's going to be beneficial to the environment. So it's like you can go into a garden and the garden can call you to do different things. And so it's where the term pottering comes from. You go into the garden with an idea of something, but you might find that within a few minutes you're doing something else, and then you're doing something else, and then you're doing something else. But there is this kind of like lovely mindless state of kind of activity where you do something and then you move on to something else. And it's like you just get called into each change through what feels like a good idea at the time. And it doesn't have to be something you construct with your mind. It's like you can feel the garden call you, or the energies in the garden call you. It's like it wants attention here, and then it wants attention somewhere there, and that you can be a part of that. And that as we open our awareness into those relationships, there is this beautiful sense of wonder that's profoundly healing that comes from it. Any of you that garden, I'm sure you've had that experience where you kind of like almost like mindlessly get lost in pottering around the garden, and the garden moves you to different areas. And you might have started off with an idea of doing one thing, but if you let it, it'll move you to do other things as well. And there can be that sense of, you can feel that sense of gratitude from the land, as the land kind of like, and the energy of wherever it is you are is grateful for your recognition and acknowledgement and interaction. It's almost like, oh, we've got a live one. So much of humanity gets around blissfully unaware of that depth of activity and the potential for relationships that are occurring all around through all of the different kingdoms. I mean, I very, very happily live on my own in the bush, in the forest, and never ever feel lonely. It's because there's so much happening all the time. It's just constantly full, but not in a busy way, just full in a kind of like wonderful way. That sense of relationship with the land, I find a really interesting one. And I go back to indigenous cultures that embodied that relationship with the land. Like as they walked on the land, they called it walking the land. As they walked on the land, it was like each footstep was a step of acknowledgement and appreciation for the gifts and everything that the land provided. And that process of walking the land kind of deepens our relationship with the land. It's like the more we acknowledge and open to it, the more it opens to us. And so it becomes this deeper, deeper relationship the more we kind of engage in this way. And so we start to learn how the land feels, what's going on in the land, and the different levels of relationship that are going on in there. Indigenous cultures had this really, really strongly. I think American Indians had it very, very beautifully before their cultures were wiped out in many, many ways. There was that sense of the mother being the earth. You know, she provided water, animals, food, life and sustenance, and the father was the sun. And lots of cultures refer to father sun, you know, as the sort of masculine god deity type kind of emanations. And when cultures acknowledge the amount that the planet provides, there is that sense of gratitude for what's given. An animal is killed, but there's a level of gratitude for what's being provided. So it's not wasted, all of it's used. And in that sense of taking from the planet, but acknowledging and being grateful for, there's also a giving back. And it's almost like we, as Western cultures, have lost that sense of acknowledgement and giving back process to the land. And I think it contributes enormously to some of the profound imbalances and destruction that we see on the planet. It's like ecosystems being brought to the brink of extinction, or to the point of potentially not being able to come back. And the Indigenous cultures had something really, really strong and really, really useful in their approach to the land in that way. It's like if when we have conscious awareness and gratitude for what's given, in terms of like, oh, this body that I live in, it's given to us by our mother, and not just our biological mother, but our mother, the planet. And the acknowledgement of the food and even the place to inhabit, to live, to grow and have experience and evolve as a soul. The senses of gratitude that come from that are like a giving back, an energetic acknowledgement of what's being provided. And it's like the giving back helps the relationship to be more balanced and harmonized. And Western cultures have lost that sense of giving back. And I feel that a lot of the imbalance and a lot of the destruction that we see comes from that lack of gratitude, that lack of kind of dual relationship of give and take that's going on. It's a little bit like if you have maybe a relationship with a friend or even a child who's growing up as a teenager. And teenagers often go through stages of selfishness because they're kind of like going through that stage of separating themselves from the parent, and it becomes all about them to get an identity. But in that process, there can be kind of like a lack of acknowledgement of what the parent is providing during that period of time. But the parent still does it because they love their child unconditionally, hopefully, and it's just what you do. Eventually, there comes a point when the child or the friend recognizes that, oh, this other person in my life has been giving input, loving, giving feedback, providing support, sustenance in some way, conditionally or unconditionally over a period of time, and I haven't realized it. And that sense of, oh, thank you, I'm really sorry I didn't get it, and the acknowledgement of what's being given, you know, on a human level, it helps to harmonize that. On an energetic level, it harmonizes the relationship between the two of you. And it's the same thing with the planet. It's like we can energetically harmonize kind of humanity's relationship with the planet, the more we are able to acknowledge and accept kind of what's there and what's being provided. And it's one of those things that, you know, humanity, individual people, if they were going through that process of acknowledging what the planet gives back, there's no way that they could go about doing a whole lot of stuff that they're doing to the planet in terms of pillaging and raping what's going and the way it's been going on to the planet itself. It's like that sense of pillaging and raping of the mother, because there isn't that sense of respect and gratitude for what's being offered. And once that sense of gratitude grows and appreciation grows, it changes you, and you can't treat the planet the way that maybe you previously would have, because you realize that whatever you're doing to the planet, you're doing to the rest of humanity and to yourself at the same time. So that if we treat the planet in such a way with blatant disregard of abuse and a lack of gratitude, essentially we're doing the same thing to ourselves. There are parts of ourselves in that are about beauty, that are about reverence and are about respect and sacredness, that we kind of do damage to that inside ourselves at the same time. And the planet beautifully reflects those things for us. And so it helps us kind of come back to, how do I treat myself? And how do I behave in a way that is profoundly respectful and does come from a place of reverence and gratitude, that kind of has a sense of awe and wonder for the beauty that's in the world, and the awe and wonder and the beauty of our own individual unique creations, our own individual unique aspects of source, kind of in the process of becoming. It's like it helps us foster and nurture that, and that we do damage to that when we don't acknowledge those things in the planet at the same time. It's like we numb ourselves to that. And so it kind of profoundly influences the whole evolution of humanity as a species and humanity as a race, when we don't have that kind of sense of respect and awe and wonder for the planet and all the different kingdoms of nature, because we're literally doing it to ourselves. And so humanity's own ability to experience those things kind of gets held back, or gets kind of reduced in some way, to put it nicely. So it's something I feel very, very deeply about, because I love the natural worlds, and I love the relationships between the worlds. It's that sense of, I see mirrors of it, like as above, so below things, just inside our human body. The relationship between the human microbiome, the bacteria that are inside of me, and the minerals that go to make up the structure of this body, and the immune system that runs in the body, and the microbiome in the gut, and how food is digested and broken down. It's a mirror image of what goes on in the soil. And I feel profoundly grateful to have had an experience in horticulture before going into an experience in natural medicine in the way that I've done. Because I see reflections that go on in the land and in the soil that are the same processes that go on inside our human body, right down to how bacteria functions in us as a human is how bacteria functions in the ground and in the land as part of the planet, even down to kind of like the composting processes in the soil are like the digestion processes that we have inside our gut. And that as things break down and different nutrients are released, different bacteria grow in the soil, and it enhances their immune system. And we have exactly the same sorts of things going on inside of us in terms of our own digestion and our immune system. And that the mineral exchanges that go on in the soil between the land and the plants are the same sorts of things of the mineral exchanges that go on inside of us, where what we digest and break down and gets absorbed into our system through our blood supply, through the lining of the gut. It's the same process. So we're not different. We're more the same to the other kingdoms than kind of different from them, or that obviously we have our discrete differences and that there are different evolutionary processes that relate to the different kingdoms. But at the same time, there are mirror image reflections of as above, so below, or as within, so without, that are occurring all of the time between the different kingdoms. And it's like, the more I see this, the more I kind of, it's like it fills me with this state of, oh my God, this is extraordinary. You know, that's what's going down there in the ground is no different to what's going on in me. And the relationship is that what's going on inside of a plant has many, many correlations to what's going on inside of me. And it helps to kind of like then open the door to, well, what else is going on? You know, it's like these are measured physiological processes that we can kind of see and measure and relate and weigh and quantify. But what else is going on in terms of relationships that aren't so easily quantifiable, but are still very, very real at the same time? You have a look at hemoglobin in the human body, in our blood. It's a molecule, and at the center of the molecule is an ion, like in metal, an ion element, but it's an ion, electrical charge. Chlorophyll inside a plant that fulfills the same sort of function, that flows around the body of the plant, at a molecular level is exactly the same shape and structure as our hemoglobin. The only difference is that instead of there being an iron ion at the center of the molecule, in a plant, it's a magnesium ion that's at the center. But they do the same, they fulfill the same function. They're the same shape and molecularly the same, they're the same, except for those two things. And I find that kind of difference extraordinary and profound. And it helps kind of like foster that sense of real experience of this is not different. We are no different, or that we are not separate. There is, because we are different, but we're not separate. There is a sense of unity and oneness that exists between us all. And that's part of kind of moving into a meditative state, or that's part of the meditation practice. It's becoming at one with what it is that we're kind of moving towards. And so there are very, very tangible, physical, real experiences kind of that we can have just through these relationships with the different kingdoms, with nature, with the land, with animals. I find that kind of just a thing that fills me with a constant state of wonder. Yeah. A lot of what I've talked about is, you know, sort of physical representations of the similarities between the kingdoms and the similarities between processes. But at the same time, there's what's even kind of like more full and wonderful are the energetic interactions between the different kingdoms. How plants have their own sense of community, and how animals have their senses of community, how they have their senses of relating and interrelationship. And I'll just kind of finish maybe just on one little example from a very beautiful book that I know Patty's read with some group. I don't know whether it's been with this group, called The Hidden Life of Trees. A guy called Peter Wallenberg from in Germany, he was given a job, he was a forester, to look after the forest for this particular village. And this forest had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the cycles of life in the forest had been documented because the forest was a valuable resource for the village. more so in kind of Middle Ages and those sort of times. But there was a sense of respect and history for the forest. So when he got the job of looking after the forest for this village, he was like, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, go out there and figure it out. And so he just wandered through the forest and he started looking and observing, and the forest started to teach him. And one of his early experiences was coming across something on the ground that he thought was a rock, and he kicked it. And he realized it wasn't a rock. It was very, very hard. And he thought it might have been petrified wood. And he kind of went down and he started to scratch it and realized that it was still alive. And that got him pondering. And then he realized that it was the remnants of a stump of an old tree, an old beech tree, I think. And he went back into the records, and this beech tree had been cut down 400 years ago. And the seedlings from this tree, like the children and the grandchildren from that tree, were keeping the tree alive through their root system. They were keeping bits of the stump alive. They were feeding sugars and nourishment back to, it's like the children were still feeding mum. And this had happened 400 years ago. And to me, I find that kind of profound, that nature just does this of its own accord. The more complex an ecosystem is, the more complex those relationships between plants are. When plants, and they can be measured and documented in all kinds of ways, when plants are grown as monocultures, rows of one type of plant, it's like they become quiet and deaf. The amount of interaction profoundly, it's almost like they become disabled in some ways and not able to fully utilize the scope of what's possible in them if plants are grown in monocultures. Whereas if they're grown in biologically diverse environments, plants become far more active, they become much more awake, and they relate much more with each other in many, many different ways that they would not do if they're just grown as monocultures. I kind of tend to think that this is probably a reflection for humanity as well, but I haven't kind of figured out what those reflections might be yet, except that we do like to be exposed to a wide, diverse variety of experiences, and it does help our growth and evolution as souls. Yeah, so that's probably about time for me.
Well, Kim, it's interesting that you say it's about time for you. However, I do think that we could have an entire conference with you. Truly, I've taken so many notes, but for me, the masterclass that you gave was even more than the content, which I adored, is your presence and your being. So really beautiful. Thank you so much. And I think what Hannah was talking about this morning in this sort of vastly diverse, abled humanity is exactly what you completed with just then. And that when there's monoculture and everybody is kind of conformist, we don't get the benefit of the vastness of our spirits and our capacities and who we are. Beautiful. Thank you so, so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to share. It's something I just feel passionately about and very, very much feel enormous amount of love for.